around analysing pollution flows. And so what happened back then is that there were almost no kind of software systems that you could use for things like analysing particularly flows. So I ended up in technology for about 25 years, and I didn't really mean to. I expected to really be in environmental engineering. But in the early days, when I wanted to send files of data around, and we're talking here like early 90s, I used an IBM system for email, and it cost me $40 a month, and I could send 40 messages. And if I wanted to send another message, it was $10 a message on top of that. And in those days, that actually seemed like not a bad deal, even though if you look back, it's probably around about $100 a message in today's terms. And then AOL came along, and you can see that AOL grew really fast up to about 2007, and then it started to decline. And I want to mention this because as a math freak, I'm really interested in the shapes of some of these curves. And so you can see here that AOL, and what they did is they killed off that old IBM system I used. So instead of charging $40 a month for 40 messages, they charged $39.95 a month for all I could email. And so I ditched the IBM system and I came over here. But in this period, somebody else was starting to eat their lunch, and it was Gmail. You can see here that Gmail just came from a very low base, and in around that 2007, 2008 period, it just grew like mad. I think it's quite important when we think about things that they start really small. And in today's world, it's really hard to imagine before Google. But even when Google first started, I used lots of alternatives, including Google. And then what happened is it became really dominant. And I think it's important when we look at, we're seeing a slight decline in milk drinking across the Western world. And what we are seeing is we're seeing this rapid increase off a very low base around alternate proteins, alternate milks. But we're seeing masses of them. So we're seeing oat milk and hemp milk and hazelnut milk and, pretty much anything you can turn into a sort of a white liquid, it's being marketed. And it comes off this very tiny base. But what we shouldn't underestimate is that some things can come off very tiny bases and grow quite fast. So I'm not saying that they will become a Google. I'm just saying that it's possible for these disruptions to occur. What are we looking at in this graph, and I promise it won't all be graphs, is that the price of food relative to income has consistently dropped over time since the 1960s. And so what we mean by that is that the amount of money that it costs a consumer to buy food relative to their income is declining. In fact, it continues to decline, particularly for food at home. And so what that means is that over time, we have to expect that the price of food back to the producers is also going to decline relative to income over time. Now, that hasn't necessarily happened in the dairy industry, but it has happened in pretty much every industry. And so it's a trend that's worth thinking about. And if you take that to its extreme, what we would need to be thinking about is, how do farmers make money if the price of food drops to zero? Now, I'm not saying that it will drop to zero, but it's a really interesting question to start asking. And I'm going to come back to that question. Here's another curve that's in a similar sort of industry. This is the price of photovoltaics, basically since the 1970s till now, and they've massively dropped in terms of what it costs to produce energy. And 2016 was a really interesting year, because that was the year that the production of electricity by solar almost approached zero. And what's happened last year is that the price of installing and operating a solar power station is now cheaper than the price to operate a coal-fired power station. And this has big implications, particularly in the US, where you'll see that Trump has put massive subsidies onto coal-fired power stations. And a large reason that he's done that is because they're no longer economic, and yet they sit on people's balance sheets for a long time. part of why I raised this is that the dairy industry in New Zealand is one of the biggest users of coal and is one of the biggest producers of coal-fired energy. And so what we're seeing is that within a very short period of time, those assets have been written down now on international balance sheets to the point where they see that coal-fired power stations and coal-fired produced energy is declining at a rapid rate in terms of the value that it has on a balance sheet, because solar is so much cheaper, not anymore just to run, but actually to install and run compared to the cost of running coal-fired. Now, Fonterra's obviously announced that they're not going to build any new ones. Synlait has some policies around the future of their coal use. But what I would say is that on one hand, there's the environmental impact, but the biggest one is actually the financial one that is driving the move away from coal internationally. I'm going to skip through this. I asked that question about what would you do if the price of food dropped to zero? And in the meat industry, there's a few areas that I just want to highlight. So that picture on the top there of someone having an operation, my very first job was on a Saveloy line, and I worked on the meat lines in AFCO and Alliance, and beef heart used to go into pet food or go for rendering, and it was worth just cents a kilo. And so now what there is a product that's made from beef pericardium. So they take the beef heart, they mill it, and they sterilize it. They turn it into a very thin, it looks almost like balloon latex, very thin sheets of this, and it's used to patch carotid arteries and hearts in humans. And so this kind of product is now worth around about $2,500 a kilo, whereas it used to be only, as I said, a matter of cents. So one of the ways that we increase price for things is we find much higher value for that product. And a lot of these products are moving into the nutraceuticals, or what we call cosmeceuticals. So finding things that people want more than they wanted the initial product itself. This product down the bottom that you can see in the packet is beef bone broth. I haven't been very well, as you can hear from my voice, and I bought this for myself at my local supermarket. And I was laughing as I bought it because it says it's for immune, joint, gut health. You can probably see that on your screens. And what it is it's powdered stock, and I boil bones. But interestingly, because New Zealand is one of the best producers of grass-fed beef in the world, we are also one of the people in the world that gets the highest price for our bones on the international market. And this year, it's almost impossible to buy grass-fed beef bones because of the growth of paleo and keto. So they're paying for something that used to, again, go to blood and bone. It used to get ground up, used for fertilizer. It's now getting such a high price on the international market that it's almost impossible to buy bones for stock, whether it's powdered or whether it's not. And if you look closely, this is an organic grass-fed product. I could not find a New Zealand sourced product. I could only buy an Australian one. But when I went back and asked the New Zealand stock companies and why I couldn't buy a New Zealand company product like this, they said that it was just that the price of bones has got too high for the New Zealand market to bear. And I think that's a really interesting one, because bones were seen as a waste material a very short period of time ago. And then finally, this fountain product, I bought this, 59 bucks. I bought it because it's going to make my skin more lovely. When I was looking at the back of the bottle, I realized that it probably contains the equivalent of about 1.5 teaspoons per bottle of Davis gelatin, which is rendered out of the kind of the cartilage in the face, the nose and the ears of the face of a cow. And a little tiny box of it at my supermarket was $3.49, and I've probably got about 1/10 of that box in this bottle of collagen. And I thought about it, it's like, jelly's not really worth very much to me. I don't eat much jelly. I might feed it to the grandchildren occasionally, but it's really not my thing. And so a little box of gelatin to make jelly from is worth $3. This, however, speaks to a human need, which is, you know, I'll admit it, most women are like deeply shallow. We do care about how we look, we care about how our hair is, whatever it is. And so I'm willing to spend $59 on that same product because it's now repackaged as a beauty product. And I think it's an interesting one because these are all products out of the meat industry that use things that were seen as waste products and that have declined in price over time. And yet the price they get in the marketplace, so $2,500 a kilo at the top, the bottom guys are getting $39.95 for a few hundred grams. And here, what's basically a couple of teaspoons of collagen is getting $60 in the marketplace. And so this idea of moving up the value chain is where New Zealand has to go in every kind of product that we produce. So the meat industry has obviously been under quite a lot of pressure, just as dairy has been. And we're seeing this move to eat less meat. And in fact, we are seeing, we're seeing a couple of things happen. We're seeing poorer people eat more meat, and we're seeing wealthier people eat less meat. So what we really want to do is we want to see those wealthier people not, you know, if they're going to eat less meat, that's probably not a bad thing. But what we want to be sure is we get a much higher price for the meat that we sell them. And obviously we've also been, had things like the Impossible Burger, which is, this is my burger. It's purely made from vegetable. It's got beet in it that makes that pink color when you bite into it. Interestingly, from a nutrition point of view, while it is highly processed, it contains almost twice the iron and bioavailable iron than a burger would. It contains fiber, which a burger would not, and it actually contains more protein than meat. So what we have to think about here is that there will be more and more products, just like there are the plant-based milks in your area. We're seeing more and more products that are coming in and disrupting the meat industry off a very low base. What we see is interesting here is that over a very short period of time, their ability to produce this kind of commodity product at a lower price than we can produce meat is the thing that is most disruptive. Not so much that people are becoming vegetarians. The evidence is that more and more people are eating plant-based food, but they're actually not abandoning meat. They're eating that and they're reducing their meat consumption. And we're fine with that so long as what we see is that we see the higher prices for the meat that they do eat. And the way to get higher prices for the meat that they do eat is to make sure that it's the most ethical, sustainable, animal welfare friendly, and so on, nutritious, and most importantly, tasty meat that we can possibly produce. A couple of last things before we stop and have a bit of a discussion is this is my favorite butcher in London. It's just down the road from my son and his wife and family. When they had their last baby, they called me up and asked me if I'd come over and help out. And I took the toddler and the baby for a walk up to the butcher. And these hipsters, you know, butchers, said to me, you know, what do you want? And I said, oh, I'm going to want a nice beef roast for tonight. They made that, or they gave it to me. And then they said, what are you going to cook with that? And I said, I don't know. How do you think I should cook it? And so they found me some bay leaves and some rosemary to put with it. And then you can see the wall behind them. And they said to me, what are you going to drink while you cook? And I'm like, genius, you know. So they said, there's a beautiful Côte de Rhône here. And then they said, actually, you'll probably need two. One for while you're eating, one for while you're cooking, and one to have with dinner. And so I took the 2 bottles of wine. And then if you look in the bottom left of the screen, you'll see there's a whole cheese department. And they said to me, what are you going to eat while you're cooking? And I was like, well, I guess I better bring them some cheese. And so took back, and instead of going in and just buying some meat, what this butcher realized is that I was in the market for a meal, not for just a piece of meat. And so in doing this, what they've done is that they really thought about how to upsell me a whole lot of things that met the need that I had, which was to provide a treat for my family. And that's what I did. And then when I'd finished, they sent me over the road to the greengrocer, I told them what I'd had, and he sent me home with some green beans and potatoes and a rocket salad. And I thought that's how we have to really think too about selling at higher prices, is that people are not really after specific nutrition. People don't actually eat meat for the protein. They eat it because they like it. They eat it because it's a treat for them. They eat it because it's a meal. And we need to remember that we're selling them a meal. We're not just selling them an individual piece of something. And then finally, this is a farm company in the UK that I really admire. So they're farmers who decided that what they really needed to do was to sell their product direct to consumers and take out a number of the people who were making money along the supply chain. And in the New Zealand supply chain, we have a lot of steps between the farmer and the consumer. And so here what they've done is that they're selling meat boxes direct, including subscription meat boxes. So you could have this delivered every week if you want, or you can make up a box of what you'd like, or you could just send it as a gift to someone. At Christmas, they do geese and turkeys and all kinds of stuff. But what they're doing is they're retaining as much of that profit from their product as possible on farm. So I'm going to stop there, and then I'm going to come back and talk a bit about technology. So I'm not sure how I see questions or anything. Oh, if I stop sharing screen, that might make that work.
There we go. That's
all right.
Good. Thank you, Melissa.
Great.
Yeah, lots of ideas there. And yeah, so we'll throw it open for questions. Any on the been typed in while we're talking, Brian?
I can't see any there, John.
No, I
none
can't
at the moment.
see either.
Cool. Okay. So so look, I'll throw it over to questions. Who wants to have a go, or questions and or comments, and how do we apply those models in our own situation, I suppose. Yeah.
I'll jump in with something. So my husband's recently just read. Have you seen the Rethink X?
I have. I've got a couple of slides coming up about it.
Okay, because
yes,
he's having kittens over it. No, I read the. He's in a right state about it. He's Mr. I love dairying and never want to stop. And now he's kind of like, we need to sell the farm. And I said that to him 2 years ago, and he ignored me. So I'm making him keep it. And then I read the first page, and I thought, and then I did a bit of Googling, and thought maybe it's a little bit of hype, but I'd be really, really interested to hear your thoughts on it, on the fact that we are apparently going to be meat-free and printing all our food by 2030.
So for those of you who haven't read it, I have got a couple of slides coming up, but I think it's this thing that, you know, so I trained as a futurist at the Institute for the Future in Palo Alto in Silicon Valley. And one of the things they really drummed into us, and that I think is completely true, is that there are no future facts. So we can, you know, we struggle sometimes to agree on what happened in the past, and we definitely can't agree on what will happen in the future. And we can do our best to try and predict trends, try and look forward at the future, but we definitely don't know what will happen in the future. So I think for a while now, we've been seeing a few different trends that come together, and I think they are important to understand. So one of them is around animal welfare. And what we're seeing is that increasingly people who live in cities are concerned about where their food comes from. And I don't think that's going to go away. And what we're also seeing is that particularly younger people who are our future consumers, they have more and more concerns about the role of animals in our food supply. So I'm not saying that they're going to abandon meat at all, or that they're going to abandon dairy, but I do think that they have very deeply held and concerns about the meat and dairy industry. One of those areas that I think we have to address is the bobby calf issue. And I know, you know, from the meat side, we're as concerned about that. And I think that more and more as consumers come to understand that our both, you know, our dairy industry can't at the moment succeed the way it does without the production of bobby calves, I think we have to link up with the meat industry and make sure that we develop a strong veal industry. And I don't believe that people are going to abandon eating meat, but I do believe they're going to treat meat like more of a treat. So that means that they're going to be willing to pay higher prices for high quality meat, good tasting meat. And so but I do think that they're going to eat a lot less meat than they currently do, you know. The other one is that I believe that milk consumption is going to decline, particularly in the West. And that milk consumption doesn't necessarily mean the decline of dairying. We're not seeing any decline in yogurt consumption. We're not seeing any decline in cheese consumption. So I believe that those kinds of products are still going to be wanted, but the ones that are going to be wanted are going to be the ones that are the highest ethical values. So people will differentiate between the kind of organic, grass-fed, outdoors, free range, you know, all of that stuff, versus what they see, particularly in the US, as factory farming, which is what they're rejecting. So that's just a mega trend. Another mega trend that we're seeing is that, and this is where I think the biggest concern is for the New Zealand industry, is that fermented protein is able to replace whey and casein in the ingredients industry within a very short period of time at a very low price. And that's the bit that's probably worrying me the most out of what's called that Rethink X report is, you know, what do we think about doing with whey and casein in the future when there's such an important revenue source to New Zealand? And I don't know what the answer to that is yet, and I'm certainly having lots of conversations internationally about it. But when I first saw the sort of fermented milk products, so this is, for everybody else, this is a new production process for making almost bioidentical milk without using cows. And Fonterra has invested into this, into international companies making these products, mostly in order to learn from them. But I'm most concerned about disruption in the ingredients market than I am in the processed milk market. I don't know if that helps, but yeah.
Good. Other questions or comments?
Melissa,
Yeah.
We're thinking about future, the people we'd want to work on our farms in the future, and
Yeah.
what are you know, given the change in young people's values and things, I mean, what would attract people to work in agriculture, do you think? Have you seen anything out there?
I think there's a few things. I did a bit of work with Lincoln around, you know, what attracts people to farm. And it's interesting because while there are a lot of people who've been raised in the city who want to farm, we forget how technological farming is. And I think there's a real role for farming and talking about applied technology and what that's like. I think there still is a lot of people who just want to be outdoors, right? Part of why I like beekeeping is I get to do something physical. I get to be outside. And I don't see that that's going to change, that there's still going to be a lot of people who love the land, want to be outside, and who love animals and want to be working with animals. What we have to be sure is that we don't end up with a picture of farming that looks like it's a backwater, that makes it, you know, and that's where rural services matter, rural health matters, my access to a midwife matters, you know, all of the things. So our young people want that. They want that outdoors. They want to work with technology. They want to work with animals. They want to also be absolutely clear that they haven't dropped off the face of the planet. And I think that's important. Part of why this getting higher prices for our products matters is that if this is seen as a minimum wage future for people, then they won't do it. They'll look for jobs that make them more money, particularly for the generation that's coming through now. So I don't know, when I went through uni, you know, I was pretty much, it cost me very, very little, right? In my first couple of years, I had a bursary which paid for my living expenses. Then my oldest son, when he went through university, there were fees, but it actually wasn't that expensive. And now my youngest is still at university, and her anxiety levels around her student loan are enormous. And so they worry about what career they might get in a very different way than even my oldest child did, because they've got this prospect of having to pay that money back, and so therefore create a career that has a financial return to them. And so if farming doesn't create a financial return for them, those young people won't choose it, because they're under way more pressure than any other generation financially. They can't afford to buy a house, and not only that, they're graduating sort of $70,000 in debt, which never happened to us. So so that's all a wee bit. It's sort of, on one hand, I think it's very attractive to people. On the other hand, if they can't get in and get a decent wage, I think it's going to be really hard for young people to come in at all. I don't know. What do you think?
Agreed.
Okay.
Agreed.
I've got a question around the ingredients. I'm also looking for something to slap on my face to make myself look a lot younger. And I remember back when we started with the robotic milking project, research project, the Sensitech guys at the time were extracting milk products for lactoferrin, which they hope to be a high-value product, and also other milk components that they could eventually made some anti-acne sort of products from. Are we missing some opportunities? Are there some opportunities out there for that? And I know at that stage it seemed to be more viable when it was taken at the farm level than at the factory level. So do we have opportunities there that anyone aware of?
Yeah. It's not my specialty, but my concern is that at the moment in the industry, we think about kind of baby formula as the highest value product we can make. And I truly think that it's not innovative enough for what we need to do going forward. And so I think we do, as an industry, we have to be investing and thinking about what are the cosmetic, applications. So one of the other things about that young generation having all of that pressure on it, the other side of it is those of us who are either the end of the baby boomers or the beginning of the next generation, we're a huge bubble and we don't want to be old, My dad is going to be 80 next year and he still runs competitively. And in order to run competitively, he eats all kinds of supplements, And I see those baby boomers, they don't want to die like having not used up their whole lives, My grandparents at 80 were old. My parents at 80 are still traveling the world doing all sorts of stuff. And so I think we also have to be thinking about particularly that boomer generation who've got money, who want to be active. What are the kinds of products we can be selling them? And that's where a lot of this cosmetic stuff works, as well as supplements. What can we be giving them that are functional foods, that are, kind of, whether it's skin products or joint products or other products. And we have to be thinking a lot about those.
A little bit of cartilage regeneration would be great for the knees.
Wouldn't it? No, I'm serious. I mean, everything. I travel to the US a few times a year and I take photos of what's selling in supermarkets. And this year, everything has collagen in. Every protein bar, every, kind of, it's just, there was an entire wall about the size of the bookshelf behind me of just collagen supplemented, what are basically candy bars, but being sold as health food. And I just couldn't get over how everything had collagen in it, and preferably grass-fed collagen. And having worked, again in the meat industry, I know just how cheap that collagen actually is versus what it's selling for. And that's the sort of stuff we need to be thinking about.
Okay, I've got a question.
Yeah.
Roshni, yeah.
Just going back to your presentation, when you talked about, companies like Pharmacin and Co. In England, and we do see a little bit of that already in New Zealand, right? People from the farm gates innovating. So I think my question is just sort of, if we step back from that, do you think there's a role for industry to play, or is that an individual farm by farm kind of innovation? I'm just curious about, do you think we need to be supporting our farmers to be innovative like that? Is there a role for the industry, or do you think actually, don't worry about industry, just get on with it if you've got good ideas? Because I just feel like, there's going to be that inefficiencies. If all of us are making the same mistakes and learning about marketing, all that stuff, how cool would it be if industry could support us at that level?
Wouldn't it? And I think, again, I think that, so I think both. I think that, you know, industry should be thinking about how do we incubate these kinds of business models too. So how do we support people like, I don't know, you know, like the Happy Cow people? How do we support people trying some different stuff? You know, how do we find a way to support companies that say want to keep carbs on? You know, is there a way to market that at a higher level? You know, what can we all learn from Lewis Road? You know, for a long time there, the only growth in white milk consumption in New Zealand came from Lewis Road. And I think if we looked back over the last maybe 5 years, we would find that in fact that they are the only thing that drives an increase in milk consumption in New Zealanders has been them. And so, you know, we need to, and this is not going, yay, they're good. I'm just saying there are some of these people who are innovating at that brand level who I think need support, you know. So in Wellington, I can buy Zany Zeus, I can buy Jersey Girl. There's a bunch of these people, Cyclops Yoga, you know, there's a bunch of them who are trying to do some innovative things. And I think we do need to pack around them and see what they've learnt and then how we can learn from them. And the same, we probably need some industry to support for things like vending machines on farm for milk. There is some amazing machinery out there now that can pasteurize on farm and bottle so that people could be doing direct to consumer models on farm. And I think we need to be doing both, right? So we still have to have the mass market, export, you know, large scale stuff, but we have to support the smaller ones who could try some innovation out.
One of the comments we got from Roger Dennis was that about Shell, which is just that Shell ran, and being a big company, they could do it at subsidiary level, but they had happy to let experiments run, and they grew the ones that worked and shut down the ones that didn't. But and how do we apply that in a cooperative model, I suppose? But I think also the Synlait have perhaps are taking it at the company level because they're doing the lead with Pride Milk, and they had some other stuff. I'm not sure how well that's working, but they're also now working on an animal welfare milk. So that's innovation or being driven from the company level, which may be easier for farmers to work with.
And they're doing it because the consumers are demanding it.
So any other burning questions, or shall we move on to the next bit and then we can capture any other questions at the end?
Let's do that.
You right, Jerry?
Yep.
Good. Okay, let's go, Melissa.
Okay, so this slide is basically 2016 was the year that humans lost the internet. And what I mean by that was that ever since 2016, most of the traffic on the internet is generated machine to machine. So it could be good bots or bad bots. So I've got a Fitbit, for example, a Fitbit that talks to my phone. That's a bot. I've got a scales that talk to my, you know, like weighing myself scales that talk to my Fitbit so I can see how many steps I did versus how much I weigh, and I can graph that. And that all happens automatically just by what are called bots. It's the same with a lot of things in the automated milking. I was out actually on a field trip milking up in Taupo a couple of weeks ago, and I was really amazed at just how much in the shed was automated, right down to the feed that was coming in for the cows while she was being milked, through to knowing who was dry and everything else. So, so these bot traffic on the internet now is more traffic than humans. And that's quite important when we think about where retail is going. So this is a fridge that is on the market. It's the third generation now, and it's of integration between a fridge and Amazon. So it's marketed by Samsung. What happens is, it's a terrible picture of a fridge. I'm sorry to the Bavarian, but I think it's got to be like a European fridge, because no New Zealander is going to have beer and artichokes. But this, seriously. So this fridge, as you put something into it, the fridge automatically scans the barcode on it, knows what you've got. And as you take it out, it scans it. If you don't put it back in, it drops that automatically into your Amazon shopping cart. So what this does, if you go back to thinking about Pharmacin, where they were selling like subscription meat boxes, what this does is it turns your milk into a subscription service. So if I'm used to buying a particular brand of milk or brand of cheese or brand of yogurt, every time I've scanned it in, taken it out, it knows that I want another one of those, and it drops that brand into my shopping cart. Land O'Lakes in the US is the most popular brand of butter. They're integrated here, so you can buy Land O'Lakes butter off the Amazon shop. And what happens is that when I go in once a week or whatever it is and check my Amazon shopping cart, I can delete anything I don't want. But otherwise, it's basically turning my fridge products into subscription, because I just now have them on like a regular delivery, and it makes it very hard for me to change brands. So what's interesting about this is that we can see that the internet kind of as a shopping experience is in decline, and that other products like Google Home or Amazon Alexa, or now your fridge, and even here your stove, become buying machines in this new future. So here, this is a Whirlpool oven. This Whirlpool oven completely runs off a mobile phone. I mean, you can run it off the dials as well. But what's interesting is it's integrated with a recipe application called Yumly. And so using Yumly here, I can put the actual recipe, I can say what recipe I'm using, I put it in the oven. I might be able to, I don't know, go out and work with my bees for a bit. It knows when to turn itself on, turn itself off. If I'm going to be late home, I can just do it off my phone. It will keep the oven warm, or it will turn it off, or whatever I want. Even more importantly now, the oven itself can help me to integrate and figure out whether I have the ingredients for that recipe. And if I want to, between the oven and this app, I can again order all of the ingredients for the recipe into my Amazon shopping cart. And so you can see that it won't be very long before the oven is talking to my fridge, and they basically have a conversation about whether or not I have those ingredients in my fridge, and whether I now want to order them off Amazon. And it all happens in a split second. You can see here again that brand really matters then, because I won't just be putting into Yumly, gosh, I need butter. I'll be going, I need butter, but my fridge knows that I already prefer Land O'Lakes butter, and so that will be what it drops into my cart. And so what we're, interestingly for me here, is I'm starting to see the decline of online shopping, and the rise of these kinds of machines that we wouldn't have thought about being shopping machines coming in the future. We also see people like Blue Apron, who are the American version of My Food Bag. These guys do 10 million meals a week, and they therefore dominate the purchasing decisions for a lot of people. So New Zealand supplies some meat into them. They'll only buy grass-fed beef. Argentina, Paraguay, Brazil, and the US also supply them with meat. But we need to be thinking as a country too, how do we get ourselves into these subscription services? How do we get ourselves so Amazon wants us? And that's where a relationship with Whole Foods really matters. And there are a number of New Zealand suppliers who are sell through Whole Foods. But you can see, because Whole Foods and Amazon are integrated together, they become very, very dominant in the way that people choose the products that they're going to have in their homes in the near future. And finally, you may not know this, but John Deere is one of the largest investors in autonomous vehicles in the world. And so John Deere has got to a point where they've said they don't want to be selling equipment in the future. What they want is they just want to sell people by the acreage that they till or reap or sow or whatever it is, so that their plan is not to sell any more John Deere tractors in the future, and purely to have a subscription service where you pay a fee to use the tractor, not to own the tractor, which also has got big implications for all of us in terms of what our asset register looks like, what does our balance sheet look like in the future. And my suggestion here is that the market for secondhand equipment is going to decline in that next 10 years. And we'll see more and more people moving away from owning their own stuff. And I know New Zealanders just love to own stuff, but it's not going to be an economic model in the near future. Actually, I'm just going to move on. This one is where we're seeing kitchens themselves being rented more and more by the restaurant industry, not owning their own kitchens, but renting kitchens. And so all of that equipment being provided by Whirlpool and others as a subscription service rather than something that they own. And this is an interesting. First Light are doing a steak club. So what they're selling into the US is a bit like Farmerson, but they're selling barbecue steak straight into a monthly subscription service in the US. So it can be done. It could be done with milk, it could be done with cheese, it could be done with other products. And these guys have really cracked how to do that. And it's a very premium product. It's 160 US a month to get their steak delivered, and it arrives once a month. So I mentioned that there were no future facts. I really believe that. Very quickly, I'm going to move into these. So Countdown in New Zealand says that people are declining in their meat consumption. I will expect to see that come through into their dairy consumption in the next few years as well. I mentioned Perfect Day. These are people who are making like bio-identical milk. So it's not like your old plant-based milk. It's not hemp milk or oat milk or anything else. This is bio-identical. So what they're trying to do is to reproduce animal-based milk in the lab, and they're very, very close to doing it. They already have ice cream on the market in the US that has the mouthfeel, tastes exactly like ice cream. It's not a plant-based product in the way that we might think about. It's not trying to be coconut ice cream. It's trying to be animal like milk ice cream, but made without the animal. And I think this actually is a bigger disruptor than I probably took it for 3 or 4 years ago, because I didn't see the point. And now I really understand that as they get the price of this down in that ingredients business, this is their holy grail. So here from Rethink X, which was what Anne-Marie mentioned, is that they're saying there's actually only 3.3% of the milk that they really need to disrupt. It's the functional proteins to bring about the collapse of the cow industry. Now, I don't think it is as dire as they say it is. I think they have to be extreme in order to get the kind of publicity that they're looking for. But what I do think is really interesting is that we're not necessarily taking this into account. So from the dairy industry, Dairy Tomorrow report, we're very clear that we think our natural competitive advantage is cost efficiency, animal health, welfare, and naturalness. And what I would say is that the cost efficiency piece is not going to be an economic advantage to us in the future, that these kinds of proteins will be able to be produced at a far less price than we will ever do it. And if we want to compete, we're going to have to move away from cost efficiency, away from commodity, and we're going to have to move to thinking about how do we create luxury goods, high-priced things like skin products, like very high-end cheese, things that you cannot reproduce with a commodity product out of the lab. And this is the bit that I think, we most have to think about. And this curve...
We might just better stop there, Melissa.
Okay, cool.
But, make your last one,
right,
and then...
This is my last curve.
We've got a couple of questions sitting there.
Okay, remember those curves from the beginning? This downwards curve that you're seeing here, this is the price of producing fermented protein. And then on the other side, what we're seeing is the price of producing naturally produced casein and whey. I'm not so interested in the casein and whey one. What I'm interested in is that downwards curve of the fermented protein, which will replace casein and whey. I think that curve is actually really on the money. And so what they have said in Rethink X, which is important, is that livestock farming will operate in artisanal, high-cost niche areas. And so I think what we need to be thinking about as a dairy industry is how do we find those artisanal, high-cost niche areas at scale? Because they don't have to be small scale, they can be high scale, big scale products, but we look for the highest possible price, not the lowest possible price, in order to compete in the future. All right, thank you,
Cool.
and sorry I went over.
All right, let's chat about that. Cool, yeah, thank you. If you don't mind, Callum, I might go to Rebecca's question first, and I think you've already touched on it, Melissa, and you can probably read it there. So,
yeah, I think big supermarkets are in deep trouble. I think what we're seeing is that I think that there will be big supermarkets. And if you go to the States, people like Wegmans, people like Whole Foods, there will be big luxury supermarkets that showcase new products. But as much as anything, I think they're going to be smaller in number and destinations that you go to in order to discover new things. Whereas what we'll see is more and more delivery over time, particularly, again, young people don't drive. So we'll see more and more delivery services. And then what we'll also see is we've seen it already in New Zealand, we see it all over the UK, and we see it in Europe, as the growth of small, local, almost like grocery stores, like Four Squares, but at like selling almost, what's the right word to say, selling highly prepared food rather than ingredients.
Yeah.
And I think we'll see the growth in supermarkets will also be, a lot of it will be in pre-prepared food. So food you just take home and heat rather than necessarily in ingredients.
Cool.
What goes into fermented protein? Actually, that's a really good question. I know that there's a substrate in there that does come from animals, but I need to go and find that out. That's a really good question. So that's some homework for me, Anne-Marie, and I'll get back to everyone on that.
Okay, great. Thank
Yeah,
you.
great question. I'm going to write myself a note. Yeah.
And then Callum's question is if these subscription models are working, does it mean the capital requirement for getting into farming is less?
It's an interesting one, because I think that it does mean that the capital requirement for farming is going to reduce quite massively. Where that's going to be tricky, though, is that sounds like a euphemism, but there's going to be some pain for the people who do have a whole lot of capital tied up in sheds, tied up in equipment. So I think sheds are going to become sheds as a service, tractors as a service. And we're talking 10 years, right? So I think that the costs of getting in are going to be lower, but I think there's going to be some write-downs of current assets, and that's going to be very painful to the banks and painful to the baby boomers in particular, who have got all of their asset on farm.
Cool. So I think
So I just want to comment on that GM one. I think what we're seeing around GM is a couple of really interesting things going on at the moment. So one of them is that people will tolerate GM if they can see a very clear benefit to them. And that's where, like, the Impossible Foods burger has a genetically modified yeast in it. And people don't mind that genetically modified yeast, because what it does is it binds the iron and it increases the nutrition of that. And so for specific reasons, people will support genetic modification. They don't support wholesale genetic modification in order to produce higher yields. And I think that's quite an important one for us to think about. The other area that we're seeing is that we're seeing much more maturity in the debate. And so we're seeing that people will are not a lot, they're not worried about gene editing. So CRISPR technology, they're not worried about that, where it's taking a gene and tweaking it. They are very worried about transgenics, so taking a gene from one species and putting it into another. And they're also really worried about wholesale genetic modification of plants in the wild. So whether that's to give it Roundup resistance or whether it's any of those, people do not want those in their food chain. So at this point for New Zealand, if we want to get those high prices, we want to keep genetic modification out of our food chain. However, if what we wanted to do was we wanted to say, you know what, we don't believe in that. We think that the best way to beat these alternate proteins is to be the cheapest possible in the world. then that's where genetic modification might be something that we're after. But I would strongly counsel against it. And we're not talking here about science, we're talking here about, do we want to sell products that our customers are willing to pay high prices for? And at this point in time, other than very specific benefits to customers, they're not willing to pay high prices for genetic modified food. And I think that's what we have to listen to.
Yeah, cool. So look, we've got about 1 minute to go. I'm just going to go around the room and just any take-home points or final points that everyone would like to make. So I don't know who wants to start.
I'll go. That's good.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Melissa. It's for me, it's really important that we are in front, or at least know about these mega trends.
Yeah.
So thank you.
You're welcome.
Cool.
For me, also, it is definitely about that craft food experience and actually taking people along with us.
Yeah.
And really trying to unify with the younger people and trying to bridge those generation gaps and be as informed as we possibly can. So thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Cool. I'll come to Terry, then I'll come to Lucinda and give you time to unmute. Yeah, Terry, any?
Thanks very much, Melissa. I am, in my thinking at the moment, it's not very developed. I'm building on Callum's discussion point and thinking that with what Melissa's presented, there sounds like different futures for fresh white milk, particularly fresh white milk locally, compared with the high volume processed milk, thinking of casein and whey. And that could work to the different, what we might be doing differently on farms.
Yeah.
So maybe we could be looking at more divergence in the farming systems by 2030, and so that could affect the sorts of skills and capabilities we want on farms.
Yeah, I love that way of thinking. I think thinking about that kind of artisanal too is that you might change your feed in order to change the flavour of the milk, for example. And I think we're doing a lot of work around this in the meat industry. You know, what happens if you feed lambs chicory? Does it make it more appealing or not? Or does it give it a different experience, right? So I think that area is really worth some exploration in terms of how to add more value all the time. Yeah, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Lucinda.
Yeah, thank you very much. For me, it's been really interesting, I guess, learning about different value chains and what different places around the world are doing in terms of encouraging value in that niche product market, because we have a family farm that's a Tata supply farm and they've always done reasonably well at marketing a niche product, but what's the future of that and how do we make that work for individual farmers, I think is a really interesting point. And also the impact that has on the people on farm and how we encourage different people to join our industry and what those roles might look like going forward.
Great.
Good. Yeah. Who wants to go next?
I can.
Loshni, good final comment.
Yeah, thanks so much, Melissa. I'm not going to listen to you for hours. It's really, it's really good. It just sort of fires off lots of new thinking. But the thing that probably concerns me is whether we're going to have the sort of usual lack of industry leadership in this space. Because, just like there's so many opportunities that, you mentioned, and maybe even more than opportunities, there's probably a need to innovate.
Yeah.
But there's going to be so many inefficiencies if we're all doing it on our own. So, I mean, I'm just thinking, how do we make sure you in front of, especially in this context, the dairy industry leaders, like how do we make sure we keep getting you in front of them so that they see the need as well? Because, the possible inefficiencies concerns me. But thank you very much.
I'm happy to talk offline too about how we might get together a group, so we're certainly in the meat industry, we're thinking about how to support the innovators. It would be great to do something similar in the milk area,
Yep, we'll go and hijack him.
Yeah, good.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. Anne-Marie?
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. I kind of echo everything Loshni said. I've heard you speak a few times and it's always awesome. And I do worry, how it's going to look in 10 years' time if we just sit here and keep saying, oh, it's only 9 years, it's only 8 years. And I've been saying paddock 1 in our farm would make a fantastic call in and get your own milk plant. So can you come and visit us, please, and convince my husband to
invite me for
so
lunch.
What I've been trying to say. So next time you're in Dunedin, can you look
All right,
me up,
I'm serious. I'm coming down in December for the Regenerative Ag Conference there's a Regenerative Ag Conference, I think it's the 8th and 9th.
Okay.
Yeah, so get my contact details from these guys and invite me. I'll come have a coffee with you.
Brilliant, thank you.
Cool.
Yeah.
Sounds fun. Yeah, great. Brian? And
yeah, I find this quite exciting, this discussion from a technology point of view, because a lot of the technologies to enable some diversified income on farm is already there. It's just a lack of value proposition. And I was chatting to the guys, a lot of the milk machine guys at the field day, saying, what can we do, guys? And they could be separating milk based on sensor data into a smaller vat for local production and bigger vat for the big supplier, all those things. And just, I think more diversified markets and some high value products would really drive that.
Yeah, and the same for like figuring out, right, that milk should go straight to a cheese as it is, right? Or it could go to specialty products. And I got really excited when I was out on this farm milking the other day at just how much sensor technology is in that shed. And we should be using it to really divide off the highest quality stuff for the highest prices.
Yeah.
Good. And finally, Callum.
Yeah, I being at Dairy NZ, I get a bit overwhelmed by these kind of presentations and that the sense of responsibility a little bit of being an industry organisation. So, I mean, over the years, there have been a few projects, and this is one of them where we're trying to think about the future and help the industry, but also farmers prepare for it. So, I guess one of the difficulties, I think John brought it up, is just the uncertainty about future predictions. And I think you might have said too about the report that came out from RethinkX. So I guess what we've latched onto, and John mentioned it, was this idea of experimenting and trying things out to get us on the path at least. So it's great, for your insights today to help us try and tune them up a little bit.
All right. Hey, well, thanks everyone. It was the first time I've ever done one of these, so you guys were awesome. Thanks so much.
Okay. Hey, thank you on behalf of everyone. Thank you very much, Melissa, for sharing your knowledge and your perspectives. It's awesome. As Anne-Marie said, or was it Loshni? I'm sorry, I've lost track. Anyway, each time we hear you, we get different ideas, and it just stimulates us to sort of think forward rather than think home. So one of the questions, which we won't have time to discuss, I thought, was how do we ride the wave? And I think maybe it is just by keeping these conversations going and keeping keeping sparking people's ideas. So thank you very much for doing that. It's coffee at Anne-Marie's place, or was it lunch?
I'll be
I've
there.
upgraded it to lunch, so
whichever.
Cool. Thanks everybody. And look, we have recorded this, so I'll let you know where the link is, and but also for those who couldn't make it.